The former head of the Pentagon program tasked with investigating UAPs, also known as unidentified anomalous phenomena, previously called UFOs, is out with a brand new book.
Luis Elizondo is a former U.S. Army counterintelligence special agent who served the nation in that capacity for 20 years. In his new book, Imminent, Inside the Pentagon's Hunt for UFOs, he details his struggle to inform the American public about what the government knows and doesn't know about UAPs. During an in-depth interview, I spoke with Elizondo about why he's getting this information out now. Here's part one of my two-part interview.
Let's start from the beginning. Let's talk about the UAP crash incident 1947 in Roswell, New Mexico. Tell me a little bit about that and then what came out of it.
Sure. There's a lot of public lore about Roswell. When you hear Roswell and New Mexico, you think of sometimes these people in morph suits and whatnot. But in reality, there was a very significant event that occurred in the late 1940s in the deserts of New Mexico, near the vicinity of Roswell. And in fact, there were two crashes. One of the vehicles was subsequently able to recover itself, and the other one did not. And when I say crashes, I'm talking about a UAP, an unidentified anomalous phenomenon, otherwise in the vernacular known as UFOs. A lot of people, when they hear the word Roswell, they think, oh, weather balloon. But turns out it wasn't a weather balloon. And that's very interesting because there's some significance there. At the time, in the late 1940s, one of the only capabilities to deliver at then the brand new atomic bomb was a modified B-29 bomber. And it turns out that the only place that those bombers were stationed were right there near Roswell in New Mexico. And so why is that significant? Because in the book, we explore the known connection. The Department of Defense has long known that UAP or UFOs have a seemingly keen interest in our nuclear equities and our nuclear technologies. And it turns out that the birthplace of the U.S. nuclear program was right there in New Mexico.
Talk a little bit about the appearance of UAPs in your own home. How did this start happening?
Yeah, so, that's a great question. I don't know if they were UAP, to be completely frank with you. All I know is that my entire family witnessed them. Some of our neighbors even witnessed them. And it occurred about the same time as I started getting into the UAP effort at the Pentagon. And it wasn't just my family. It was, I learned very quickly that other members of our effort, of our program, were experiencing strange and bizarre phenomenon in their homes. And in fact, I think there's going to be a lot more of that revealed probably in the subsequent few years, because there's people that are coming out and having that conversation. Now, I want to be completely honest with you. I don't know if they're UAP, but it did occur at the time, which strangely enough, whether it's coincidence or not, around the same time that I was getting involved in the UAP program. And then when I started divesting myself, those incidents stopped. These were green, diffuse balls, sometimes about the size anywhere between a softball and the size of a basketball. But they were luminous green balls of light. Now, some may describe them, for example, as perhaps ball lightning or even St. Elmo's fire. It's all possible. It could very well be. There could be a natural explanation for what my family was experiencing. It was just very interesting that it happened to coincide with my involvement in the Pentagon's UAP program. No one ever got injured. Nothing was ever, damaged or destroyed in the house. It was just really bizarre because they would literally float right down the hallway and disappear through a wall or through a door. I would say probably curiosity was the better part of our reaction. A little bit of surprise, but I don't think I certainly never felt threatened. It was just a very, very strange occurrence. And again, what I find so interesting is that other individuals that were involved in our program also experienced similar activities while they were also involved in the Pentagon's UFO program.
Talk a little bit about that. How did you get involved in the Pentagon's UFO program? How did you get involved in the Pentagon? Tell me a little bit more of your story in that way.
Sure. Well, I graduated college in the majors of microbiology, immunology, with advanced studies in parasitology, not parapsychology, the study of parasites, microorganisms. So I've always been a disciple of the scientific method. Later on in my military career and then later in my federal career, I was a senior special agent in charge in counterintelligence. So I've always been an empirical, data-driven person, just the facts, ma'am kind of guy. So for me, I've never been necessarily interested in sci-fi as a kid or anything like that. And one day I was brought into an office, and a gentleman with kind of shaggy hair, literally a rocket scientist, one of the senior rocket scientists for the U.S. government, asked me to be part of his effort and provide some counterintelligence and security support. The gentleman had glasses, and I remember him looking over his glasses and looking at me and asking me a very direct question. And he asked me towards the end of our conversation, he says, "What do you think about UFOs?" Keep in mind, at this point, I had no idea what this program was that they were asking me to be part of. And so I thought for a moment, and I responded truthfully. I said, "I don't." He said, "Well, what do you mean? You don't believe in UFOs?" And I said, "No, I didn't say that. What I said is I don't think." You asked me if I think about them, and I said, "No, I really don't have the luxury to think about them. I'm too busy chasing bad guys and doing other things." And I remember him saying to me, it was almost this like an ominous warning. He said, "Look, don't let your analytic bias get the best of you, because you may learn some information here that may challenge any preconceived notions that you may have." From there on, I guess you may say the rest is history, but that's when I learned that the U.S. government did indeed have a UFO program, and it was a very robust program. There were a lot of very, very good people working that program, and this wasn't the only program. There were other programs that the U.S. government had in the past that also studied with equal vigor the UFO topic.
Pretty fascinating, just listening back to our conversation.
Yeah.
That was part one of my two-part interview with Luis Elizondo. Elizondo is out with a new book called Imminent, Inside the Pentagon's Hunt for UFOs. He says this is his own personal account of his time working with the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And very much so, when we were interviewing, he was like, "Ask me anything. I'm open to anything." And he really wasn't trying to promote his book. I did want to know about his book, but he was like, "No, just ask me. What do you want to know?"
I mean, people want to know what's out there.
Right.
What does the government know? What do they don't know? I mean, it's fascinating. That's going to be a good read for sure.
Why is this important to you to come out with this information now? Why do you think the American public needs to know about it?
Well, first of all, I believe that America can handle the truth. I believe that America deserves the truth. And I believe there are reasons to keep things from a secrecy perspective, national security perspective. There is always valid reasons to keep things classified, especially when you're dealing with adversaries. You don't want to tip your hand and show the adversary any type of technological advantage or vulnerability you may have. So there are reasons to keep things classified, but I also believe there are reasons not to keep things classified. And you know, the law is very clear. We classify things to protect two things: sources and methods. What we don't do is classify things to hide things that are embarrassing to the government or malfeasance. And at the end of the day, there is a distinct chain of command. And I have always believed in three pillars, and that is transparency, accountability, and anti-corruption. And at some point, somewhere, we began to realize that there were groups of people who were keeping this information hidden from people within the government who had a demonstrated need to know. People in Congress, for example, people in the chain of command. They were not being informed that U.S. payer tax dollars money, your money that you pay in your taxes, was being used to fund a UFO program. And I do not think that the mere fact that we're not alone in the universe potentially, or that your tax dollars paid for a UFO program, should be classified. There's no reason for it other than to maybe hide embarrassment and because of the stigma and taboo associated with it. I think that this is not a conversation like fine wine, where the longer we keep a cork on it, the better it gets. I think secrets are perishable. I think they have a shelf life. I think they're like vegetables in your refrigerator. And it comes a point where if you leave them there too long, they begin to rot and they begin to stink, and you got a real mess on your hands. And that's what motivated me to do what I'm doing. That's what motivated me to step forward, and that's what motivated me to write a book.
What is Congress doing now when it comes to UAPs?
You know, I've got to give Congress huge kudos. This is one of the rare moments where you have both people on the left and the right coming together to try to figure out what we're going to do about this topic. It is truly a bipartisan issue. And for that is, I don't want to say that's historic in itself, but it's almost historic in itself, where both sides can agree to something, right? And they're doing a lot. You know, you have people from AOC to Tim Burchett in the House that are championing this cause. They want hearings, public hearings, to inform the American people, which is exactly what they should be doing. And they want answers, and they also want accountability, right? They want to know where all this money is going into the defense industry that's unaccounted for. Furthermore, you have people on the Senate side that are also like Chuck Schumer on one hand and Marco Rubio or Senator Rounds also championing this cause because they want accountability. And some of these folks actually sit on committees where they are entitled to that information, right? If you sit on a committee like the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, they have a demonstrated need to know. And if they're not being informed of where your tax dollars are going and the type of technology that we're producing and the advantage that we have over our enemies, then there's something wrong. Someone somewhere in the bureaucracy is making a decision that is not necessarily in the best interest of the American people.
Well, you worked in this department of the Pentagon. What was the most shocking information you uncovered or came across and it's information that you can share with me today? What was the most shocking piece of information, situation that you came across during your time there?
Wow, great question. It wasn't a single event. There were many, many, many things that occurred that to me was rather compelling. In my book, I go into a little bit of those details. The reason why that's important is because it actually went through the Pentagon review process. This is not a book that I just penned and said, here you go. It actually went through the Pentagon almost a year. It took for a security classification review. And even then, the Pentagon decided to redact some of the information, understandably so. I think, you know, when you realize that we're talking about technology that can fly unimpeded into controlled U.S. airspace and over sensitive military installations, and can perform in ways that really are beyond next generation capabilities, really doing things that we don't quite even understand the physics yet, how they're doing that. And yet there they are doing it. And we're collecting that information off radar and gun camera footage and also trained observers. And they're able to do it over our controlled airspace and sensitive military installations. That's a problem, right? That's a real national security concern. Then you overlay the fact that there seems to be some sort of keen interest in our nuclear equities, our nuclear weapons, our nuclear production, and nuclear power generation. When you put all those pieces together, the jigsaw puzzle now begins to come into focus, and you begin to realize we have a significant problem on our hand. Look, if this was, let's say, a craft that had a Russian star on the tail or a North Korean tail number, this would be all over the front page news. But because these things don't have tail numbers, they don't even have tails or wings or control surfaces or cockpits, it's been crickets. Nobody wanted to have the conversation. In fact, it was worse because of the stigma and taboo. You had pilots being persecuted. They were being basically flying a desk, taken off flight status and say, here's your desk, and we're going to give you a psychological evaluation. You don't ever report this type of information. Keeping in mind, we have recorded incidents of these things coming so close to military aircraft that they are splitting a combat formation. Now, if you know what a combat formation is, these aircraft fly very, very close to one another. So imagine a UAP flying in between and splitting a formation of combat aircraft. So they're getting very dangerously close to our military pilots in some cases.
It's pretty fascinating. We're going to post this interview on KOMO's YouTube page. Elizondo out with a new book called Imminent, Inside the Pentagon's Hunt for UFOs. He says this is his personal account of his time working with the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. He says the group of people that reported directly to him received emails and videos regularly of encounters with UAPs that interacted with military equities.